I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
I'm not even supposed to be here today! Oh, fuck you!
Come on, you want me to drive? You're supposed to be suicidal. Remember, I'll
Anybody
drive.
a drive?
Get in the car. Fuck me in the ass. Fuck you, you stupid cunt.
Hey everyone, it's Don G. Corleone here, and I am here with a brand new movie review, and this movie review is going to be for the 2004 psychological thriller based off the Stephen King's short story, Secret Window, directed by David Koepp and starring Johnny Depp. So what is the plot of Secret Window? Well, this movie and story in general focus on a successful writer going through a rather unfriendly divorce from his wife of 10 years named Mort Rainey, played by Johnny Depp. His wife's name is Amy, played by Maria Bello. Mort Rainey is alone and bitter in his cabin and continues to work on his writing when this random stranger named John Shooter, played by John Turturro, is his name, shows up on his doorstep and tells Rainey, "You stole my story." And Mort says he can prove the story belongs to him and not Shooter. And while Mort digs around for the magazine which published a story in question years ago, things begin to happen around Shooter. Mort's dog then dies, more people die, and divorce proceedings with Amy continue to get uglier, and it seems that Shooter has Mort over a barrel. But perhaps Mort has his own ideas on how to resolve all the problems that plague him lately. Now, I have kind of technically adapted this new kind of thing where I say the reaction first, so I'm going to say the reaction to the movie first. So as my reaction to this movie, well, as I said in the beginning, Secret Window is based off of Stephen King's short story, that when this movie got released, it got mixed reactions from audiences and critics to the point where it really kind of just faded from memory after it left theaters, and did get remembered though for the divisive ending that people pretty much ripped to shreds. Although, some people are finding this film a lot more relevant now after the whole Amber Heard and Depp trial. Because some scenes with the divorce stuff, and I have now eventually I did get around to eventually just finishing watching the film. And how was it from my point of view? Well, I wouldn't really say that it's a bad movie. It's more just an alright time waster. There's some stuff that could really be fixed and does kind of bog down the film. So it's not really that great. It starts off with a great first half, but as the second half and third half progress, it goes more and more downhill from there. And especially the ending, the twist is also kind of... When I saw the movie, I already kind of got spoiled the ending, but even though I got spoiled the ending, this is a movie where you can kind of guess how it's going to end as very much soon as this Shooter character appears. Well, how was it made? Well, Secret Window got filmed in the town of North Hatley, Quebec, in the eastern townships 2 hours southeast of Montreal. Also got filmed in Lake Massaweppi, Lake Sakoncomi, Lake Gale, and of course the Quebec Bromont Village. And the footage of the ocean during Mort's restless night on the couch was some B-roll footage I got from Lost World, Jurassic Park, a film that David Koepp was involved in. And so, after Secret Window was adapted, shot, and marketed, and Oh, before I get started on the release date, like apparently, like the way the actual story ends is a bit more lazier, but I'll get to that part later. But anyway, Secret Window would go on to be released to the public on March 12th, 2004, and it did get mixed reactions, and I think it made about 92 million worldwide, so it was a moderate hit at the box office. It didn't do too bad, box office wise. Like this was one of the second short stories to be adapted from the Stephen King compilation Four Past Midnight, and Secret Window is pretty much one of the King's adapted stories, and not being great or memorable, but it does at least try to tell its premise quite chillingly and maintain like closer to B movie status and actually true to its dark core. And this was back around the time when movies like this and other hits that Johnny Depp was getting, like Sleepy Hollow, Edward Scissorhands, Ed Wood, and a year before this came out, Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl, and then a year after this, he would go on to do the Willy Wonka reboot with Tim Burton, and of course, a film called Finding Neverland. This film and those movies I mentioned, like, this was around the time when Johnny Depp was becoming one of the most interesting actors of the 2000s generation. Right here. And honestly, I think Depp was kind of the perfect choice for the role because I don't think I could have seen anybody else playing this character that much well either. Like, the best thing going for the movie is Depp. Like, Johnny Depp was always a very reliable actor in these in the 2000s. Like, really, like, he definitely did kind of deliver quite a few stuff back then, and even then, like, his Mort Rainer really does make wonders about how writers could be in general. And it's a question we're often left with ourselves, like, are these kind of the problems that Stephen King goes through? Like, yeah, I guess there's like Stephen King does have problems as a bit of a writer. Like, he can't really come up with satisfying endings for most of his stories. So sometimes a lot of the film adaptations often change the endings and right there. And there's some times when kind of the movies are a little more preferable. Like The Shining, I think is great. The Shawshank Redemption, The Green Mile, I think are great adaptations. And of course, like, was also writing the screenplay. Like, this was pretty much Cope's third directional feature. And Cope does use warm colors in the film, and it puts emphasis on the yellows and oranges, and highlights the peacefulness of the lakeside setting. Like, it's pretty much a contrast to, like, the codes and the conventions of the thriller genre, especially if it wasn't for, like, all the nighttime scenes. And when such of the scenes, like, we have, like, fog roll, and a conversation that takes place between Mort and Shooter, who is not really a real person, but there's more on that when I mentioned the twist ending. Like, and it leads to some kind of intense moments in their confrontations, and most of the film does often take place in broad daylight. There are some scenes that take place at night, but most of the film does kind of take place in broad daylight. So, how do we start off? Well, the movie does start off on a pretty nice little note. It does set up our story well, and it sets up the kind of story you're about to watch. Well, Mort Rainey, our writer protagonist, he catches his wife Amy having an affair with their friend named Ted. And so he ends up retreating to his cabin in Tashmore Lake in New York. And Amy though stays in their former home, and a few months pass by. Mort is now suffering from writer's block. He's not finalized his divorce yet. And the first scene we see of him at the cabin, this man named John Shooter arrives at the cabin and tells Mort, "You stole my story." In a way, accuses Mort of plagiarizing the story that's called Sowing Season. So after Shooter leaves and the maid's cleaning his house, he reads Shooter's manuscript, and Mort discovers it's identical to his own story called Secret Window, except for the ending. And of course, we find out that Mort actually did plagiarize another author's story, but Mort then tells Shooter that his story was published in a mystery magazine 2 years before Shooter's, and that pretty much invalidates his plagiarism claim. But Shooter wants proof and warns Mort against contacting the police. And so that night, Mort finds his dog dead outside the cabin, and a note from Shooter that gives Mort 3 days to provide proof. And it actually already has a pretty good setup right there. You do get some colorful and brilliant cinematography made by Fred Murphy, and some sinister, mysterious music score fitting to the nail-biting tension by composer Philip Glass, and the atmosphere is definitely very captivating, and it definitely makes you feel like a part of the world that this movie is in, like a fly on the wall, and the story unravels quite well. Like, there's plenty of times where John Shooter, played by John Turturro actually does come off as pretty intimidating. Like, he's this supposedly great villain, like the shadowy figure with mystery and many enigmas surrounding it. And John Turturro does an incredible job of bringing this character to life in his performance. And there's also many references made to other stories as well. Like, there's some nice little great foreshadowing throughout the film, and the director is like not. You can tell like David Cope is not going for this total shock with the ending, but the suspense gets gained because we figure out bits of the mystery and surprised by like something that kind of comes off the wall. Like, you can tell at least he did try to write kind of a good twist, but even if it came off as predictable in the end, I mean, I wouldn't say it's one of the worst endings ever made, because by like some people do make it out to be, but it is not really too much of a satisfying twist with how it gets played out. But and the similarities we see between Mort's short story and the events of the plot, like, they are still fun to observe occasionally for the viewer if they ever rewatch the film. And like, so after Mort finds his dog dead, he tries to report the incident to Sheriff Newsom, and then he goes to his and Amy's house intending to retrieve a copy of the magazine, but because Ted and Amy are there, he leaves. So he hires this private investigator named Ken Karsh, who stakes out the cabin and then speaks to Tom Greenleaf, this local resident who thinks he saw Shooter and Mort talking together. And Shooter then appears back at the cabin again and demands that Mort revise the ending of his story, give it Shooter's twist, where apparently Shooter's twist is the lead kills his wife. And then, of course, the next day, Mort gets a call that an arson fire destroyed Amy and Mort's house and the magazine as well. Then Mort reveals to police that he has an enemy as well. And so then we meet Karsh again, and he tells Mort they suspect someone like threatened Greenleaf after Greenleaf claims he never saw Mort and Shooter talking together. And Mort and Karsh agree to confront Shooter, but they have to meet up with Greenleaf at the diner the next morning. Then Mort, however, then arrives late, though, and he discovers that literally neither Karsh nor Greenleaf showed up at the diner. Then Mort then encounters Ted at a gas station where, like, during the whole scene where they're going over the belongings they lost, like, Ted is trying to look over the list as well, but Mort thinks he's rubbernecking, and so Ted is forced to leave the office, and then Mort and Ted get into this argument where Ted orders Mort to stop being a part of his or Amy's lives. Then after the whole diner scene, Ted meets up with Mort again, this time at a gas station, and Ted yells at Mort to sign the divorce papers. But Mort refuses because he thinks Shooter isn't Ted's employee, so he just taunts Ted and it just takes off. Like, the way that Mort Rainey is actually living his story in this movie, it does seem so clever, even if it's a little confusing at times. And when Mort sees the house cracking, it actually does feel a little symbolic with this whole transformation he goes through. Like, that's a bit I do love, and the whole bit of do love when this scene happens. Like, it's telling that he's split, he has to decide which way he wants to go. One of the things I do like about the film is that it definitely does have this kind of Alfred Hitchcock-like theme, and the music score does give that suspenseful tone throughout the film. And the first half of the movie is good, but it's when the second half happens and the major twist gets revealed that doesn't really get explained all that well. Like, the page is gone from the magazine, or the house getting burned down, or the second half when it's like starting to kind of come together. You can kind of tell how the point is, like, you can tell how it's going to end once you get to that second half of the film. And the first half starts off well. Like, the first half does well in getting you invested in the story, but then after that, it just comes falling down. Like, the second half is just average, and right there, and the reveal and the whole payoff just don't really pay off all that well, and you just kind of predict it, how it's just going to go from there, and it just feels too familiar. And The stuff that does make the film work well is the conflict between Mort and Shooter, or Depp and Turturro. Like, it definitely is Depp's movie all the way, but Shooter does work well as a device to kind of get Mort suitably freaked out and go through this supposed transformation and stuff. And so, after that, Shooter then summons Mort to a meeting place, and when Mort goes to the meeting place, it turns out that Karsh and Greenleaf did not show up at the diner is because both of them were killed. Both of them got killed inside Greenleaf's truck, and he passed out the site when he sees the axe in the car. And then of course he recovered. Then after he recovers, Shooter then tells Mort he killed the two men because they were interfering in his business, and so. And he warns Mort that pretty much he implicated him in the two men's murders. And of course, the axe in the car is there because he used Mort's axe and screwdriver as the murder weapons, and he tells Mort to dispose of the bodies, and Mort agrees to meet Shooter at his cabin to show him the magazine containing his story. And that's supposed to pretty much arrive that day because it got sent overnight by his agent. Then Mort retrieves his tools and pushes Greenleaf's truck with both bodies off a steep cliff into a water-filled quarry, and then the truck sinks with their bodies, so their bodies are disposed of or just in the water. Then Mort goes back into town and he gets a package containing the magazine for the post office, but then it turns out it's already been opened. Sheriff Newsom does try to talk to him for a minute, but Mort says he doesn't have a minute and he drives off, and the pages, and we see that the pages containing the story got cut out, and so this is where we're kind of starting to get to our ending, where at Mort's cabin, Mort does see Shooter's hats, and when he sees Shooter's hat, he puts it on, and this is where the twist comes in. Like, he begins speaking to himself, trying to make sense of the events. Mort then is frustrated and throws an object at the wall, and then that hole in the wall becomes this growing crack, fracturing the cabin in half. And he looks in the mirror, and he sees the back of his head reflected instead. And of course, we find out from this whole reveal that Shooter was never a real person. Those times when Mort was talking to Shooter outside, he was talking to himself. This whole time, like, Shooter was never at the cabin. It turns out Shooter was just a figment of Mort's imagination, and was a character just brought to life for Mort's undetected identity disorder. Because I got created to cope with his anger and carry out the tasks that Mort could not do, like killing Greenleaf or Karsh or killing his dog. It turns out like those three got killed by Mort himself. And burning down Amy's home, that was all Mort himself, and the person that now takes full control of Mort. And this is the twist, like, I knew was, I could already, like, even though I got spoiled the ending, I could see where it was coming the whole long way away. Right here, like, it's kind of obvious this is how it's going to get revealed. Like, you can tell the Shooter guy's not real, because here's the thing. If a writer lives lives out in the woods, how in the fuck would, maybe like the private investigator and the maid obviously know where he lived, but a person who would read a writer's stories, how the fuck would they know that they live out in the woods and just be able to find their place that easy? Right there, because, like, yeah, that would be impossible. The woods don't really, most cabins in the woods don't have much home addresses. So if this guy was real, then how the fuck would he know where Mort lives? Like, Mort lives out in the middle of nowhere. Like, yeah, he goes into town, but this place does not look even close to town or any kind of remote part of society. So it'd be hard to kind of figure out where he lives. So I could tell this Shooter guy wasn't real. Right there, like, it was from the start, like as the movie progressed, you could obviously tell the Shooter guy was not real. And so I saw this twist coming a long way away, and it didn't really feel like it paid off all that well, because it kind of felt like they were kind of trying to go the Shining route again with Jack. and it just didn't feel all that satisfying. Like now the movie does have some other interesting performances too. Like Maria Bello, despite not really liking her character, is not too bad, and there is some I guess, humorous moments where Mort is like falls asleep and he has this dream where apparently his couch is over this cliff and waterfall and he falls, or where he thinks this fake shooter guy is in his house and he accidentally smashes the mirror and then smashes his shower door and then literally says to himself, I just killed my mirror and my shower door. And it turns out there's this mouse in his shower and he does let it go out in the wild, so he doesn't kill it. Like, at least I did like though that Cope does pay some good attention to what David Fincher did with the Panic Room screenplay, because this is definitely from one of the writers of Panic Room. Like, so, and right there, like, what was much else though about David Cope's direction? Like, the answer is just really nothing. Like, the man does like suspense because he does direct suspense, but directing suspense can be a complicated matter, and the single camera he has is like not really that useful. And the opening credits, the shot at the lake, and the camera just starts getting near to a cabin where it does wander around the place and ends up where the main character more is sleeping for our introduction of the place once we do see Mort's place. And keep in mind, like, David Coep, his track record has been poor lately because he's written stuff like the shit Mummy film recently with Tom Cruise. He wrote the shit Indiana Jones 5, and now he's going to be involved in that in that Scarlett Johansson Jurassic World movie, which I could give a rat's ass about. Which honestly looks just as bad as the last two sequels have been. Well, the theatrical cut of Dominion, I think, is not good, but the extended cut, I think, is slightly superior, but still, that's a film I'm not excited for, don't care to watch. But back to this review, though, but it goes the same way kind of during the entire ride. There's movement side to side or up and down with a lot of dull cameras, and like, there's probably two ways of directing suspense that's slow in pace, but that's the thing, though. The story is slow at times, and it's predictable at others, and the conclusion with this so-called twist does not feel like a great payoff. And remember the frustrations you have with the film, though. Depp's performance at least makes the film worth a decent watch, because if anybody else played this Moore character, I don't think the film would really be all that watchable. To be fair, like, Johnny Depp in this film is kind of what makes the movie worth an occasional watch. Not like a buy watch, but more of a just maybe like a one-time watch or something. But so now we get to more of the whole split reacted finale where Amy arrives at the cabin, hoping to now get Mort to finalize the divorce. So she finds the whole place ransacked and sees the word shooter carved repeatedly on the walls and furniture. And then Mort appears and wears Shooter's hats and speaking and acting like him. And Amy realizes the name Shooter represents Mort's desire to, guess what? Shoot her. On the doors when Mort reveals himself as the shooter personality of himself. Right there, so that's how he came up with the name Shooter, as in to shoot his own wife, as payback for cheating on him. So he chases Amy, he stabs her in the leg with scissors, and Ted arrives, he gets ambushed by Mort and killed and likely decapitated off camera with a shovel. Amy watches helplessly as Mort is beaten to death and probably, I think, decapitated or something with a shovel, because it does look like Mort does decapitate him for what we see in the shot. And then he approaches her while he recites the ending of the sowing season, about pretty much about her murder going to be remaining a mystery, while the killer would be eating this corn on the cob. So then after Amy and Ted are killed, and more aware they're buried later, it cuts to like many months later where Mort has now recovered from his writer's block and his life passion has returned, but when he goes into town to shop, everyone in town fears and shuns him because of the rumors about the missing people that got associated with him. He tries talking to this one girl, but this girl does not want to talk to him and is trying to leave immediately. And so he buys like salt or butter and stuff like that. And Sheriff Newsom then goes to his place. And when he arrives at the place, he sees his front door open and some gym equipment out. And he goes up and finds Mort working on another story. And he tells Mort this: "We don't have evidence that you committed those murders, but eventually, but you're a suspect, we're going to find those murders, and you're going to go to jail when we find them. Do not come into town again because people are scared of you. Do your shopping in New London." Yeah, I pretty much tells him that, but Mort's like, whatever. I don't care about that. And he tells Newsom on his way out that the ending to his news story is perfect because, and he quotes the sowing season again, ending again, where, and as that's being quoted, we see this cornfield in Mort's garden. Like, this Mort's garden's now a whole field of corn. And it's on the cobs, and it's implied that Amy's dead bodies are buried under there. And because they're buried under there, it allows Mort to basically eliminate any evidence of their murders. That's the thing, though. What about the murders of Greenway and Karsh? What about them? And what about the murder of his dog? Wouldn't the police find his dog buried in the ground? And wouldn't they probably... Wouldn't like a crane company get called by the police, and wouldn't they find Karsh and Greenway's bodies in the water and be able to trace the license plate of that car? They never touch up on that one. They just really, the only thing they really touch up on the last scene is Amy and Ted's bodies being under the cornfield, and then the last shot is Mort biting into the corn he has on his plate, and then the movie's over. There's this alternate ending that's shown on the special features of the DVD where they actually do show their bodies under the earth. Like, very deep, deep down away from the cornfield. But that is how this version ends. And apparently that's how the movie version ends, but how the real story ends, like, people can debate the movie ending all they want, but the actual story, written story's ending is honestly apparently stupider, because apparently how the written story ends is Ted and Amy survive Mort's attempt on their lives and Mort dies, and then through some supernatural stuff, the John Shooter manifested and came to life from Mort's imagination and was really the one to commit the murders and arson. And so, honestly, I think that ending is honestly stupider, and I can kind of see why they changed it. But even this change ending, though, does feel predictable, because as the movie progresses, you start to kind of figure out how the twist is going to go. You already can kind of tell the shooter person is not real at times, and because we never know how the hell some random stranger would know where the hell some writer lives out in the woods. And the whole alternate ending where it shows their bodies, I do wish that was kind of left in the theatrical, because then I would kind of buy them being buried under the cornfield a little more. And when I have a problem with the sheriff telling Mort that he's a suspect, he's not welcome in town, that they'll eventually find the bodies, and I don't think you can just come to some guy's house and tell him, you can't come into town anymore because people are scared of you. Like, just because of that. And because, you don't really have a search warrant at this rate, and even once they do get that search warrant, once they get the search warrant about that, I feel like the bodies in the water, the dog's body in the ground, and Amy and Ted's bodies, they'll all be dissolved into nothing, and long gone to nothing at that rate. So, this sheriff guy's gonna have nothing to prove. And Mort's never going to get caught, so good luck trying to keep him out of town at that rate. Because you're gonna have no evidence once you're finally able to link that stuff. Those bodies will be gone. There will be no more. They'll all be disappeared. So jokes on you, Newsom. And another thing, like, why the fuck should I really care about Amy or Ted when they get murdered by Mort when he overcomes his personality and becomes Shooter? Yeah, the dog, Karsh, and Greenleaf should definitely not have been killed. Those three definitely did not deserve to die, but Amy and Ted, once again, why should I care about those two? Why should I care if Mort becomes Shooter, kills their asses, and they get buried in the cornfield, and their deaths never get resolved? Why should I really care about that, or really be scared for them? Because, like, how Ted, like, in all Ted's scenes with Mort, or his scenes in general, how Ted demands that Mort stay the fuck out of their lives and sign their divorce papers and yell at him when he discovers them in the hotel room having that affair. He just and of course, like, trying to go on their, like, list of things when it's not really his place yet. It's technically still Amy and Mort's at the time. This guy just comes off as a douche. And how Amy apologized, like, I only screwed one guy, I didn't screw any other guys. That did not really feel all that sincere at all. And it never seemed like she even loved Mort to begin with at all. And kind of contributed to his whole writer's block, so... And most of her scenes, like, when she ever does call him back, she doesn't really seem all that concerned for him, so... She just comes off as a bitch. So, it's hard for me to really feel much sympathy for them when, like, Mort kills them in the end. It's kind of really hard for me to feel that way. So I didn't really care when they got killed. So usually, since this is a more mixed review, because the movie's not really good, nor is it really terrible, it's just kind of more mixed. So I'll mention the good and bad here for sure. Like, the good qualities for sure are Johnny Depp's performance, his scenes with the fake personality Shooter, aka Totoro. The suspense and the cinematography are pretty cool. The wide shots of the cabin does look pretty nicely detailed. And the story is clever in the first half. Like, at first it seems like you're going to get a pretty great story, but once the second half unravels, it gets clunky and it does fall apart after that. And the bad qualities for sure. The second half, where it's definitely where it all goes downhill. And the ending twist, you can really see coming a long way away as soon as the Shooter's character is introduced. More. And when the second half happens, and by the time the house burns down, you can tell where this is going to go. And there's some pretty clunky dialogue too, in the scenes with Maria Bello. So for short, Secret Window, it's not terrible, but it's really more of a mixed bag, because that's really just a stream and not a frequent rewatch, because it does suffer some typical Stephen King problems. So, if you want to watch the film, I would probably just stream it online. So in the end, I would just stream Secret Window if you want to see a good performance from Johnny Depp and a not too bad Stephen King adaptation of a short story if you're bored. But don't really buy it, really. Anyways, guys, that's it for my mixed review of Secret Window. And if we're ranking Secret Window, here's how I'm going to rank this movie. So overall, if you were a fan of Johnny Depp and Stephen King adaptations, then I would probably just stream Secret Window, because it's not terrible, but it's not great either, and it does suffer a lot of problems. And if we're ranking how I'm going to Secret Window, I'm going to give Secret Window a 6.5 out of 10. Alright, there we go, guys. That wraps up my review for Secret Window. Now I want to know in the comments down below what you guys thought about Secret Window. Whether you like this movie, whether you hate this movie, whether you're more split on this movie like I am. And I'll just put this back here. And until then, guys, that'll be it for this review. Thank you all for watching. If you like this and want to see more, don't forget to like and subscribe to Don G. Corleone.